I grew up in Kansas, in a small town on Miriam, just west of Kansas City. And it was a town smaller than Chestertown at the time, and feed store, that kind of thing. And then it was my parents' ambition to move into the suburbs to the east. That was not my idea at all, because there wasn't anything in there, and there were no sidewalks. And the typical sort of Midwestern mentality, the housing development that they settled on was an old golf course, which somebody had bought and converted it into a housing development with the name Fairway Manor. And it's from that first name that I began to notice that these patches of suburbs have these wonderful, bizarre names. Running Mead Court, often dictated by some Anglophile. Anyway, my parents essentially moved into the suburbs, and I essentially went the other direction. Went to the University of Kansas as an undergraduate, and then I went to worked on a farm there. I was in farming country where I grew up, so I knew a bit about it, and I worked at a farm. And then later, after I graduated, I went to work at a small ranch in western Kansas and took a job teaching at Fort Hays, Kansas State College, or as we used to say in those days, it was called St. Nevertheless of the Prairie. So that's my Kansas connection. I was run out of town in Hays, Kansas for my opposition to the war, declared persona non grata, and then also I had written a play there called No Negro Problem in Hays. It came from an ad that the State Department of Education, or the local community, was running, that people could come and teach school in western Kansas because there was no pollution, clean air, clean water, and no racial problem. And I thought it was very funny. There was no racial problem. There were no races. I mean, just white Catholics and white Anglo-Saxon Protestants at war with one another, nonetheless. But so I wrote a play that made fun of that provinciality, and it drew the attention of the Kansas Bureau of Investigation, who sent people out to see if I was guilty of the Sedition Act, violation of the Sedition Act. And they arrived with wing-tip shoes, skimpy brim hats, but they wore ponchos in order to be in disguise, which we all anyway, it caused a great stir, and I was simply run out of town. And I went then to the then celebrated MFA program at the University of Arkansas, and there were a group of us there who became more or less successful. And I spent a year there. I already had an MA from the University of Kansas, and I spent a year there. And while I was there, I was in the English department office, and the phone rang. It was noon. There was no secretary, and I picked it up, and I said, hello. And I said, University of Arkansas English department, hello. And the man at the other end was Norman James. And he said, we're looking for a writer. Well, I was looking for a job. I said, you found a writer. So we talked baseball, and he hired me. That's a short part of the story. The year before I came, or maybe 2 years before I came, Sophie Kerr Underwood, the Saturday Evening Post writer and novelist, had died and left Washington College a fabulous amount of money in an endowment. And half of the money was to go to the celebrated Sophie Kerr Prize. But the other half was given to the English department to do whatever they wanted to do with. No, there were stipulations. I think there were 4 areas in which they could use the money. And one of them was to bring speakers to campus. I still remember Nick Newland saying, well, it's just a very lot of money. I don't know that we can. Do you know any writers we might bring to campus? He said, we had a writer here some time ago. I don't know who he was. But the students seemed amused by him, something like that. So I said, sure. And it turns out a friend of mine was then what is now the Poet Laureate of the United States. He was the great poet William Stafford. So I called up Bill and asked him if he would come. And Bill said rather shyly, said he would, but could I pay him? I said, yes, I could. Yes, I could even pay him. I was at Yale. I'd been invited to give a talk up at Yale, and when I was there, I noticed that every college at Yale, I think this is true, had a printing press in it somewhere in the building. And I was talking to the guy who invited me, Howard Lamore, later became president of Yale. I said, is this true? He said, yes, would you like to see one? I said, sure. He took me to some college. We went into the basement. There was a printing press, and there was this guy printing away. And he had students coming in, and I thought, well, that's wonderful. Just about the same time computers were coming in, I thought, well, how about we have a printing press? So Douglas Cater, who was always agreeable to almost any madness that I thought up, said sure. So he found us an old Chandler and Price press and had it moved down, and then we got Betty Casey to build an edition and so forth. And I wrote a piece about that too. And what happens is that the students in those days, the students could print their own poems on the press. So there they are, cranking off their poems, learning how to set type, all of that stuff. And some of them take to it very nicely and enjoy it. So it's an opportunity. I was in the opportunity business. That was my idea, is to, I was never, I made a little learning go a long way. That was a famous remark by Benjamin Franklin about William Smith. When William Smith became president of Washington College, Franklin, who never liked Smith at all, said, he will make a little learning go a long way. Very funny. I'm not a scholar, but I know how literature works. I know how techniques work. I can help kids understand it that way. And so I became one wag said about me, derisively, I must say, but I thought it was kind of funny. So I've turned out to be the Saul Hurok of Washington College. Me? A Kansas goy? I thought it was very funny. I would say that it's probably more difficult now for students to see themselves as writers in any successful way in America than it has been since the time of Melville. And it's simply because I think it was Nelson Algren who said, I don't know why I try to write so well when people are so pleased with poor writing. But the market is flooded with books with cut up and repressed trees and ink that have terrible writing in them, and people are reading it, and so therefore, the worst thing you can say about a writer trying to make a living is that he or she is a mid-list literary writer. Nobody would buy that at all. Well, the piece is written because somebody introduced me and Bob Wilson, and he asked what kind of piece I might like to write. And I said I was always interested in the idea that the McSorley's Old Ale House was sort of a literary hangout, an artistic hangout. There's a famous E. Cummings poem, which in anthologies was titled Snug and Warm Inside McSorley's. And I read it as a young man in Kansas, and I wanted to go. Because in those days, we would make pilgrimages to places we'd heard about either in songs or read about in books and so forth. So my friend Harris and I had already made a pilgrimage to Bangor, Maine because of the song that had something to do with Bangor, Maine. And we'd gone to New Orleans to see what Truman Capote was about and where we found a Vargas painting. So we'd made these trips. And at some point, there was a guy who was a university professor in Kansas who asked me if I would like to house sit his apartment in the village. It was in New York City, and as I write there, I was so innocent, I didn't know you could have a village in a city. It seemed sort of bizarre to me. We thought a village was something out of Heidi, the Sound of Music with these little tiny villages. So it was not even an innocent abroad, and so I went there, and I discovered that what appears to be in art and in literature something made up is real. For instance, I still remember when we went to New Orleans, we discovered there was a streetcar named Desire. What? We thought it was just a play. Here came the streetcar. Look at that here. I said, God damn, it's Desire. That's where we got it. So we were just, the world was just new to us. It was I remember talking to a woman in Western Kansas. She said everything was new to them during the early part of the 20th century. She said they'd heard about radios before they got a radio. When they got a radio, they heard about airplanes before they saw an airplane. Go out and look in the sky. God damn, here comes an airplane. So that was backwards. I was going backwards. So I wrote about this experience. When I got to New York, I found St. Vincent's Hospital, Edna St. Vincent Millay. I thought, my God. Also, I can still remember I was trying to get to Yankee Stadium to see a ball game. I was down in the subway, and I said to somebody down there, how do I get to Yankee Stadium? He said, and I quote, he said, take the A train. I thought, my God, this is like by the Brooklyn Bridge. This can't be true. It's because I'm from Kansas. You're putting me on.